The fluorescent lights in courtroom 3 hummed above me like they were running out of patience. I'd been sitting here for 40 minutes, watching my son's lawyer shuffle papers and glance at my clothes every few seconds, like I was some exhibit she hadn't been briefed on. I wore a flannel shirt I'd picked up at a Goodwill bin for $3, jeans with a grease stain on the left knee, work boots that had lost their steel toes 2 winters ago. I looked exactly like what they wanted the judge to believe I was, a confused old man who couldn't take care of himself. "Your Honor," my son's lawyer said, standing with the kind of confidence that comes from charging $400 an hour, "we're here today because Gerald Parkman, age 62, has demonstrated a clear and consistent pattern of cognitive decline and financial instability." She paused to let that land. His wife, my late daughter-in-law Margaret, passed away 14 months ago. Since then, Mr. UAM, I find Mr. Parkman has abandoned his home, taken a part-time job as a handyman, earning $9.50 an hour, and has failed to maintain even basic financial records. We are requesting the court grant emergency guardianship to his son, Tyler Parkman, to protect both Gerald's well-being and the remaining assets of the Parkman estate. Tyler sat at the other table in a navy suit I'd never seen before. Crisp white shirt, gold cufflinks. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine, and maybe he had, because the watch on his wrist cost more than my truck. He didn't look at me. Hadn't looked at me since we'd walked in. Next to him, his wife Vanessa was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, performing grief like she'd rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror. She wore a black dress, tasteful, expensive, the kind Margaret would have admired. Margaret, my wife of 36 years. Gone 14 months, and it still hit me like a truck every morning when I reached for her side of the bed and found it cold. "Mr. Parkman." I looked up. Judge Robert Easton was watching me. Late 60s, reading glasses perched low on his nose, deep lines around his mouth that said he'd spent decades listening to people lie to him. "Yes, Your Honor. You've been sitting very quietly through these proceedings. Your court-appointed advocate has filed minimal objections." He glanced at the young woman beside me, a legal aid attorney named Dawn who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. "Do you understand what's being requested here today?" "I do, Your Honor." "And do you have anything you'd like to say?" I looked at Tyler. My son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike on Maple Street. The teenager I'd driven to baseball practice every Saturday for 6 years. The man who was now asking a judge to declare me incompetent so he could control everything I owned. "No, sir," I said. "Not at this time." Tyler's lawyer smiled. Not at me. At the judge. The way a poker player smiles when they think they've read every card on the table. "Your Honor," she continued, "I think Mr. Parkman's silence, while understandable given his condition, speaks to the urgency of our petition. His son Tyler is a successful real estate developer. He has the resources, the stability, and the genuine concern. Miss Alderman." Judge Easton's voice was flat. "I'll decide what speaks to what. Let's move to identification for the record before final arguments." He looked down at his papers, then at me. "Mr. Parkman, please state your full legal name for the court." I took a breath. 37 years of discipline, 14 months of patience. Everything had led to this moment. Gerald Raymond Parkman. The name hung in the air for exactly 2 seconds. Judge Easton's pen stopped. He looked up at me slowly, the way a man looks at something he thought was a shadow and realizes is a door. Then he removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and stared. "I'm sorry," he said carefully. "Could you say that again?" "Gerald Raymond Parkman, Your Honor." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Judge Easton turned to his clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd been typing steadily throughout the hearing. He whispered something. The clerk stopped typing. His hands went still over the keyboard. Then he stood, walked quickly to the side door, and disappeared. Tyler's lawyer frowned. "Your Honor, is there an issue? We're prepared to proceed with—" "Sit down, Miss Alderman." She sat. Tyler leaned toward Vanessa. I could hear him whisper, "What's going on? Why is he acting weird?" The side door opened. two men walked in. Dark suits, credentials visible on their belts. FBI. Behind them, a woman in a gray blazer I recognized, Special Agent Diana Morales, Financial Crimes Division, someone I'd worked with 11 years ago on the Bellingham case. She walked directly to Tyler's table. "Tyler James Parkman," she said, and her voice carried the practiced calm of someone who'd done this dozens of times. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Please stand up." Tyler's face went white. Not red, not angry white, the color of a man watching the floor open beneath him. "What? No. What is this?" He looked at me for the first time all morning. "Dad? Dad? What did you do?" Vanessa screamed. Not a word, just a sound sharp and raw, like something tearing. "This is outrageous." Miss Alderman was on her feet, her composure cracking like cheap paint. "Your Honor, my client is in the middle of a legal proceeding. Whatever this is, Agent Morales said, placing handcuffs on the table with a deliberate click, is a federal warrant signed 2 hours ago. Your client has the right to remain silent." I sat there in my $3 flannel and watched my son get handcuffed in a courtroom. It didn't feel the way I thought it would, not triumphant, not satisfying. It felt like pulling a splinter that had been buried so deep you'd forgotten it was there until someone touched it. "My name is Gerald Parkman. Most people these days call me Jerry, if they call me anything at all. But for 29 years, I was Senior Special Agent Gerald R. Parkman, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I put people in prison for a living. Hedge fund managers, corporate executives, a sitting congressman, 2 of them actually, and the CFO of a bank that had been laundering money for a cartel operating out of South Texas. Then I retired, moved to a quiet house in Ridgefield, Connecticut, with Margaret, and thought I was done with all of it. I was wrong. Margaret and I met in 1986 at a friend's barbecue in Alexandria. She was a high school English teacher with a laugh that could fill a room and a stubbornness that could empty one. We got married the following spring. Tyler came along in 1989. He was a good kid. Bright. Ambitious in the way that worried me sometimes, because ambition without patience is just impatience wearing a tie. He wanted things fast, the car at 16, the apartment at 20, the business at 25. Margaret said I was too hard on him. Maybe she was right. I spent a lot of years chasing criminals and not enough years chasing my son around the backyard. Tyler went into real estate after college. Started small, flipping houses in Fairfield County, then bigger commercial properties, development deals, partnerships with investors I'd never heard of. By his mid-30s, he was pulling in serious money, the kind of money that changes how people look at you. Then he married Vanessa. She was smart, polished, the kind of woman who could charm a room and calculate the net worth of everyone in it simultaneously. Tyler was smitten. I had reservations. Margaret told me to keep them to myself. For a while, things were fine. Sunday dinners, holidays together. Tyler and Vanessa bought a house 20 minutes from ours. Margaret was happy. That was enough for me. The trouble started slowly, the way it always does. Margaret was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's in 2019. She was 60. The doctors said progression varied. Some people had decades. Margaret didn't. She deteriorated fast. By the end of 2021, she needed full-time care. I handled it. I'd retired. I had nothing but time and love and the stubbornness she'd given me by osmosis over 35 years. Tyler started visiting more often. At first, every visit, he'd bring up money. The house, the savings, Margaret's life insurance, the investments I'd built over 3 decades of federal service. He never asked directly. He'd frame it as concern. "Dad, you should really let me help manage the finances. Dad, you shouldn't have this much responsibility on your shoulders. Dad, maybe we should set up a trust." I'd spent 29 years reading people. I knew what concern looked like, and I knew what calculation looked like. Tyler wasn't concerned. He was circling. Margaret passed on January 8th, 2024. Quietly, in her sleep, holding my hand. The last thing she said to me was, "Don't let them take the garden." She loved her roses. I promised her I wouldn't. 2 weeks after the funeral, Tyler came to the house with a folder. "Dad, we need to talk about the estate." Margaret wasn't even cold in the ground. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Her cardigan was still draped over the kitchen chair where she'd left it the last time she could walk to the kitchen. "Not now, Tyler." "Dad, this is important. There are tax implications, probate issues." I said not now. He left. He came back a week later, and a week after that. Each time, the folder got thicker. Each time, the suggestions got more specific. He wanted power of attorney. He wanted to be named executor. He wanted access to accounts he had no business accessing. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover for another 3 months, was that Tyler didn't just want my money. He needed it. His real estate business was hemorrhaging cash. 3 development projects had gone sideways. He'd borrowed from investors who didn't file paperwork with the SEC, the kind of investors who expected returns regardless of market conditions. He was nearly $2 million in debt, and the walls were closing in. I found out because I couldn't stop being who I was. Old habits. Margaret always said I couldn't look at a spreadsheet without turning it into an investigation. She was right. When Tyler left his laptop open at the kitchen table during one of his visits, I wasn't snooping. I was clearing dishes. But the screen was right there, and the numbers were wrong in a way that made the back of my neck prickle the way it used to when I'd find the first thread of a fraud case. I didn't say anything. Not then. Instead, I did what I'd done for 29 years. I started pulling threads. It took me 6 weeks to understand what Tyler had built. On the surface, Parkman Development was a legitimate real estate firm. Underneath, it was a machine designed to do one thing: move money from places it shouldn't leave to places it shouldn't arrive. Tyler was taking investment capital from offshore sources, money with no clear origin, funneling it through property transactions, inflating appraisals, creating phantom renovation costs, and spitting out clean dollars on the other side. He'd learned this. Not from me. I'd spent my career putting people away for exactly this kind of scheme. Tyler had learned it from a man named Dominic Salib, a silent partner whose name appeared nowhere on any corporate filing but whose fingerprints were all over the financial architecture. Salib was a known figure in certain circles. Not famous, not public, but the kind of name that made prosecutors go quiet and defense attorneys go pale. He'd been investigated 3 times by 3 different agencies and walked away clean every time. Not because he was innocent, but because evidence had a way of disappearing when his name was attached to it. My son was in business with a man who made evidence disappear. And now my son wanted control of my estate not to protect me, but to use my assets as collateral for deals that were already underwater, to run my savings through the same machine he'd built for Salib. I should have gone straight to the bureau, called my old contacts, handed everything over, let the system work. But I knew the system. I'd lived inside it for 3 decades. And I knew that Dominic Salib had beaten it 3 times. He had people, not just lawyers, but people inside agencies, people who could slow investigations, lose files, reassign agents. If I reported through normal channels, Salib would know within a week. The evidence would evaporate. Tyler would be warned. And I'd lose any chance of protecting what Margaret and I had built. Worse, Tyler would get the guardianship. He'd have legal control over everything. And my grandson Marcus, 7 years old, Tyler's boy, would grow up in a house built on laundered money, raised by a father who'd sold his soul to a man who made problems disappear. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I decided to become invisible. I called Frank DeLuca, retired FBI, 71 years old, the most honest man I'd ever worked with. We'd built 4 cases together over the years, including the one that took down Congressman Hadley in 2011. Frank lived in a fishing cabin in upstate New York and answered his phone on the second ring like he'd been waiting for it. "I need your help," I said. He listened for 40 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're talking about your own son, Jerry." "I know what I'm talking about. If this goes where you think it's going, Tyler could do real time. Federal time. I stared at Margaret's roses through the kitchen window. I know. And you're sure about Salib? I've traced 11 transactions in the last 18 months. Shell companies in Wyoming, LLCs registered in Delaware under nominee names, property deals with appraisals that don't match market value by a factor of 3. This isn't sloppy bookkeeping, Frank. This is infrastructure. Frank exhaled. What do you need? I need to disappear from the picture. Make it look like Margaret's death broke me. Like I can't function. If Tyler thinks I'm falling apart, he'll push harder for guardianship, and he'll get sloppy because he'll think nobody's watching. You want to play possum? I want to build a case so tight that Salib can't wiggle out of it. Not this time. That's going to take a long time, Jerry. Months, maybe longer. I've got nothing but time now. 2 months later, I sold the house. Not really, I transferred the deed to a trust Frank helped me set up, structured so it looked like a distress sale. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store in Danbury. I took a part-time job as a handyman for a property management company. $9.50 an hour, cash jobs on the side, exactly the kind of life that would make a guardianship petition look reasonable. Tyler was delighted. I could see it in his face when he visited, the poorly hidden relief of a man watching his obstacle remove itself. He started dropping hints about the guardianship within a month. Dad, I'm worried about you. You're not eating. You're not taking care of yourself. Maybe we should talk about some kind of arrangement. I'm fine, Tyler. You're living above a hardware store, Dad. Mom would be horrified. Don't tell me what your mother would think. He backed off. For a while. Then Vanessa started calling. Concerned daughter-in-law. Gentle suggestions. Have you thought about assisted living? Have you talked to your doctor about your memory? We just want what's best for you. What they wanted was access to the $460,000 in my retirement accounts, the life insurance payout, and the equity in a house they thought I'd stupidly sold for less than half its value. Meanwhile, every night in my apartment above the hardware store, I worked. Encrypted laptop, VPN, burner phone for calls to Frank. I traced every dollar that moved through Parkman Development. I identified 14 shell companies across 6 states. I documented wire transfers to accounts in the Caymans and Cyprus. I mapped the entire network, Salib at the center, Tyler as the primary conduit, Vanessa handling the bookkeeping with a precision that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. The hardest part was Marcus. Tyler brought him to visit sometimes. My grandson, 7 years old, with Margaret's eyes and a gap-toothed smile that made my chest ache. He'd run through my tiny apartment looking for something to play with and find nothing because I'd stripped my life to the bare walls. Grandpa, why don't you have a TV? Don't need one, buddy. Mom says you're sick. Are you sick? I pulled him onto my lap. No, Marcus. I'm not sick. I'm just different now. Sometimes when people get older, they change. I don't want you to change. I hugged him. I know. But sometimes change is how we fix things. He didn't understand. He wouldn't. Not for a long time. By the fall of 2024, I had everything. 43 documented transactions totaling $6.8 million in traceable laundered funds. Bank records. Emails Tyler had been foolish enough to send from his personal account. Recorded conversations. Connecticut is a one-party consent state, and I'd worn a wire to 3 family dinners. A forensic accounting analysis that connected Dominic Salib to every layer of the operation. Frank delivered the package to a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime unit in New Haven. Someone he trusted, someone who owed him. They moved fast. Faster than I expected. Within 6 weeks, a federal grand jury returned. Sealed indictments against Tyler, Vanessa, and Dominic Salib. But I needed the timing to be exact. Tyler had filed for emergency guardianship in November. The hearing was scheduled for February 12th. His lawyer, Rebecca Alderman, partner at a firm that specialized in elder law and had no idea what her client actually did for a living, had built a clean, professional case. Documented my declining living conditions. Statements from Vanessa about my confusion and forgetfulness. A note from a doctor Tyler had taken me to, who'd spent 15 minutes with me and concluded I showed signs of early cognitive impairment. I wanted them in the courtroom. I wanted them on the record, under oath, telling a judge I was incompetent, and then I wanted the doors to open. I called Frank. "February 12th, I said, 15 minutes into the hearing. "You're a dramatic old man, Jerry. I learned from the best." Judge Easton was the other piece. I'd researched every judge in the district. Easton was a former federal prosecutor. His daughter had been scammed by a financial advisor 10 years ago, lost her entire savings. Easton had spent the rest of his career making sure people who preyed on the vulnerable didn't walk away clean. He was incorruptible, thorough, and he'd recognize my name because he'd been a junior attorney on the prosecution team when I testified in the Hadley case in 2011. The morning of February 12th, I dressed carefully. The flannel shirt from Goodwill, the stained jeans, the broken boots. I looked in the mirror and saw what they'd see, a worn-out old man who'd given up after his wife died. A man who needed someone to make decisions for him. My phone buzzed. "Frank." 2 words. All set. I drove to the courthouse in my 20-year-old truck, parked between a BMW and a Tesla, and walked inside. 7 minutes. That's how long the chaos lasted after Agent Morales read Tyler his rights. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, hyperventilating. "Miss." Alderman demanded explanations nobody gave her. Tyler kept saying my name, over and over, like he thought I could stop what was happening. Like he thought I would. "Dad. Dad, please. Dad. You don't understand." I understood everything. That was the problem. When they took him out, the courtroom went quiet. Judge Easton looked at me for a long time. "Mr. Parkman." He said my name differently now. Or should I say, former Senior Special Agent Parkman. "Jerry is fine, Your Honor." He leaned back. "I've reviewed the summary the Bureau filed with my clerk this morning. I have to tell you, I've been on this bench for 18 years, and I've never had a guardianship hearing end with an FBI arrest. I apologize for the disruption." "Don't." He almost smiled. "Your son's attorney just spent 40 minutes arguing you were mentally incompetent. Meanwhile, you've been conducting a solo investigation that dismantled a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation." He looked at the empty plaintiff's table. "I'd say the record speaks for itself." He straightened his papers. "The guardianship petition is denied with prejudice. Mr. Parkman, you're free to go." And for what it's worth, his voice softened, just slightly. Margaret would be proud. My throat tightened. I nodded because I couldn't speak. I drove straight to Tyler's house. Not for Tyler, for Marcus. Vanessa's sister was there, a woman named Kristen who'd never liked me and made no effort to hide it. She was standing in the kitchen, looking shell-shocked, her phone pressed to her ear. "I'm here for Marcus," I said. She stared at me. "You can't just—" "I have a court order granting me temporary emergency custody." I held up the paper. "Judge Easton signed it 20 minutes ago." "Where is he?" Marcus was in his room, sitting on his bed, surrounded by Legos. He looked up when I walked in. His face was tight with the kind of confusion that children carry when they know something is wrong but nobody will explain what. "Grandpa, Mom and Dad didn't come home." "I know, buddy." I sat on the edge of his bed. "They had to go somewhere for a while. But you're going to stay with me." "At your apartment?" His face fell. "No, not the apartment. I've got something better. We'll figure it out together, okay?" "Okay." He was quiet for a moment. "Grandpa?" "Yeah?" "Are Mom and Dad in trouble?" I put my arm around him. "Yeah, bud. They are." "Did they do something bad?" "They made some mistakes. Big ones. And now they have to deal with that. Are you going to fix it?" I thought about Tyler at 17, scoring the winning run at a baseball game and looking into the stands for me. I'd been in Houston, testifying in a fraud case. Margaret had recorded it on a camcorder. I watched it that night in a hotel room and cried. "Some things can't be fixed," I said. "But we can make sure you're okay. That's what matters right now." He leaned against me. "Can we bring my Legos?" Every single one. The trials took 14 months. Dominic Salib went first. The evidence was airtight, 23 years of criminal enterprise, documented transaction by transaction. His lawyers tried every maneuver in the book. Motions to suppress, challenges to chain of custody, arguments about jurisdiction. None of it worked. He was convicted on 27 counts and sentenced to 19 years. Tyler's trial was in October. The prosecutors offered a deal: testify against Salib, plead to reduced charges. He took it. Not out of conscience, out of math. His lawyers showed him the evidence and told him the truth. There was no winning this. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. The judge gave him 4 years. Federal minimum security. He'd be out in 3 with good behavior. I was in the courtroom when he was sentenced. He turned and looked at me as they led him away. Not with anger, not with hatred, with something worse: understanding. He finally understood who I was. Not just his father, not just a retired agent, a man who had spent his entire life making sure the truth came out, no matter what it cost. Even when the cost was his own son. Vanessa got 22 months. She cooperated fully, turned over records, testified against Salib. Her lawyer argued she'd been manipulated by Tyler and Dominic. Maybe she had been. Maybe she hadn't. The jury didn't seem to care much either way. Marcus asked me once, about 6 months after the sentencing, whether his dad was a bad person. We were in the backyard of the house. I'd bought a small place in Brookfield, 3 bedrooms, a yard big enough for a dog, which Marcus had been campaigning for with the relentlessness of a seasoned lobbyist. I was planting rose bushes along the fence, Margaret's variety. The yellow ones she loved. I set down the trowel and looked at him. Your dad made bad choices, I said. He got in over his head with people who didn't care about him, and instead of asking for help, he tried to fix it by doing things that were wrong. That doesn't make him a bad person. It makes him a person who did bad things. What's the difference? The difference is that bad things can stop. A bad person can't change what they are, but your dad can change what he does. If he wants to. Do you think he wants to? I thought about Tyler's letters from prison. Stiff at first, defensive, full of justifications, then gradually softer, more honest. The last one had said, simply, "I'm sorry, Dad. For all of it." "I think he's trying," I said. "And trying counts for something." Marcus nodded. Then he said, "Can we get the dog now?" I laughed. The first real laugh in a long time. We got the dog. A mutt from the shelter, brown and white, missing half an ear. Marcus named him Captain, for reasons he refused to explain. I consulted for the Bureau occasionally, reviewing case files, training new agents in forensic accounting. The work was light, flexible, and kept my brain from rusting. Most evenings I was home by 5, making dinner while Marcus did homework at the kitchen table and Captain slept on his feet. Frank DeLuca visited in the spring. We sat on the porch drinking coffee, watching Marcus throw a ball for Captain in the yard. "You did something extraordinary, Jerry," Frank said. "I planted Margaret's roses," I said. "Everything else was just following the money. You know what I mean, your own son. Most people couldn't do that. Most people don't have to." He was quiet for a moment. "Any regrets?" I watched Marcus tackle Captain in the grass, both of them rolling in the mud, laughing and barking. The roses were blooming along the fence, yellow and bright against the weathered wood. I thought about Tyler, about Vanessa, about the house Margaret and I had shared for 30 years, now sold for real this time, the money set aside for Marcus's education, about the $3 flannel shirt still hanging in my closet because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "I regret that my son became someone who needed to be stopped. I regret every minute Marcus has to grow up without his parents in the house." Frank nodded. "But do I regret doing it?" "No, because Marcus deserves the truth. He deserves to grow up in a house where people don't lie about who they are and what they've done. Margaret would have wanted that. She would have wanted him to know that the truth matters, even when it breaks your heart." Frank raised his coffee cup. "To Margaret, too." Later that night, after Marcus was asleep and Captain was snoring at the foot of his bed, I sat in the living room with the lights off. On the mantel was a photograph of Margaret, taken the summer before her diagnosis. She was standing in her garden, holding a pair of pruning shears, smiling at something I'd said. I couldn't remember what. I'd give anything to remember what. I thought about that courtroom. About Tyler's face when the handcuffs clicked. About Judge Easton's voice when he said Margaret would be proud. People will look at you and see what they want to see. They'll see the flannel shirt and the work boots and the apartment above the hardware store, and they'll think they know your whole story. They'll think you're finished. They'll think you've got nothing left. Let them. Because the truth doesn't care what you're wearing. The truth doesn't care how old you are or where you live or how much money's in your checking account. The truth just sits there, quiet as stone, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, it doesn't knock. It walks right through the door. Marcus asks me sometimes if I'm sad. I tell him the truth some days, yes. I miss Margaret every single day. I miss the son Tyler used to be. I miss the life I thought we'd all have together. But I look at that boy, 8 years old now, building Lego castles on the kitchen floor with a one-eared dog at his side, and I know I'd do all of it again. Every day in that apartment, every hour pretending to be less than I was, every moment of watching my own son dig himself deeper into a hole I knew I'd eventually have to seal shut. Because protecting the people you love isn't about being strong. It's about being patient. It's about trusting that the truth will be enough, even when everything around you says it won't. So here's my question for you. How far would you go to protect someone you love? What would you sacrifice to make sure they grew up knowing that honesty matters? That integrity isn't something you put on like a suit when it's convenient. I walked into a courtroom in a $3 shirt and let my own son try to have me declared incompetent. I spent 14 months pretending to be a broken old man while I built the case that put him in prison. And if I had to do it over, I'd wear the same shirt. Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every single one, and if you know someone who's been written off, someone the world has decided is finished, share this with them. Sometimes the people who look like they've got nothing left are the ones who've been holding all the cards.